Hey guys, in this lesson we're going to talk a little bit about supporting claims, addressing naysayers, and including specifics. Now to do this, I want to show you a few examples from your reading for today, which is Mr. Gore, Your Solution to Global Warming is Wrong by Bjorn Lomborg. Now the general thesis of this article is not necessarily that cutting carbon emissions is a bad idea, but that there are better ways for us to spend our money and resources than fighting carbon emissions, better ways to ultimately help the people of the world and to help the climate. So when Lomborg is making his argument, he includes lots of the things that you're going to want to do when you're writing your proposal. So the first one of those, supporting your claims. Remember, if his general claim is that cutting carbon emissions is not the best solution, he needs to prove that to us. So if we look here under the real moral imperative, we see him backing up this claim. He has to provide support. So he says, if we spent $800 billion over the next 90 years solely on the Gore solution of mitigating carbon emissions, we would rein in temperature increases by just 0.3 degrees by the end of this century. So what he's doing here is providing logical evidence. He's using logos to support his claim that this carbon emission idea is not the best way to fight climate change. He's going to later argue what the better ways are, but here he's just supporting the argument that the Gore solution is wrong. Now, you'll notice that he doesn't provide a citation. There's a couple of reasons for this. First of all, he's relying on his own credibility as a researcher to back up his claim rather than citing his source. Second of all, just the stylistic requirements of a magazine article often do not require you to list your sources within the article, whereas MLA format requires that you do. So if you were going to be writing this sentence, you would need to include the source from which you got it. Because this was published in a magazine and Lomborg is relying largely on his own credibility, he can get away without doing it. Your first secret word of the day is Jupiter. So here's an example of him supporting his claims. If we move on down, we can see an example of him addressing a naysayer. He starts talking about malaria, and he says here, campaigners for drastic CO2 emission cuts will tell President Obama and other world leaders that the Gore solution is especially critical because global warming will mean more malaria. In warmer, wetter conditions, mosquitoes can expand their range. Models reveal that global warming will put 3% more of the Earth's population at risk of catching malaria by the end of the century. Now, if you remember our video on voice markers, you can see that all of this is the idea of these campaigners for drastic CO2 emission cuts, these naysayers who disagree with Lomborg. We then see this but, another voice marker indicating that we're shifting back to Lomborg's point of view. But this is a perfect demonstration of the problem with the Gore solution. So what Lomborg has done is he's brought in a naysayer, and then he has immediately responded to it. So that's something that you'll want to do as you're making your argument and as you're laying out your plan. Now, including specifics is another way to be logical and to make sure that your audience buys into what you're selling. So if we continue here, even if we continued with worldwide Kyoto Protocol style CO2 emission cuts for the rest of the century with its inconsequential 0.3 degree reduction in temperatures by the year 2100, we would cut the malaria risk by only 0.2%. There's a specific value that shows us that this plan is not a great one. On the other hand, for $3 billion, 2% of the annual cost of the Kyoto Protocol, we can invest in mosquito nets and medicine today and cut malaria cases by half within 1 decade. Again, specific numbers, specific percentages that show us exactly how effective his plan is going to be. He then restates it another way. Put it another way. Every time the Gore solution for CO2 reduction saves one person from dying from malaria in the future, the same money could save 36,000 people today. So that's pretty hard to argue against when he breaks it down like that. And the reason it's so convincing is because he's been so specific. He's brought in specific numbers, and it's awfully hard to argue with numbers. So the way I think about it, including specifics when you're laying out your proposal is especially important because you're basically making a sale. Imagine you go to the car dealership, and the dealer just points at a car, and he goes, hey, that's a good car over there. That's a really good car. Don't worry about the specifics. Just trust me. It's a good car. You should get that one. Well, you're probably not going to buy it. Instead, you're going to want to walk over there with him and have him give you some specifics. He can talk to you about gas mileage. He can talk to you about reliability. He can tell you the specifics of the engine and the horsepower. And he can tell you the types of tires that are on there and how many miles you can expect to get. And he can talk about the warranty. He can give you all these specifics, and he will, because he wants you to buy that car. And he knows that being vague is not going to get you to hand over the money and get behind the driver's seat. He wants to be specific to make the sale, just like you want to be specific, just like Lombard is being specific here. So keep those things in mind. Specifics, addressing naysayers, and supporting your claims. The second secret word of the day is waterfall. If you have any questions about this, be sure to ask me.